Captain Nora Winters sipped her coffee, seated comfortably on the bridge of the Odyssey, a mid-sized exploration ship commissioned by Earth's Interstellar Alliance. She stared out at the stars as the ship drifted through the void, her crew operating quietly around her. They were in an uncharted sector, quiet, remote, far from the politics and protocols of the Galactic Council, a routine mission. Or at least it had been, until the distress signal appeared on their sensors. The signal wasn't just unexpected, it was on a quarantine frequency, a type reserved for biohazard threats. Nora stared at the flashing alert on her console, her coffee forgotten. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Reyes, leaned over to examine the readings. His expression soured immediately. "This is a Council-designated quarantine planet, Captain. We're not supposed to go near it. Says so right here. Quarantine laws? No exceptions." Nora folded her arms, her brow furrowing. "And yet there's a distress beacon coming from down there. Somebody needs help." Reyes shot her a cautious look. "Or somebody wants us to think they need help. There's a reason the Council quarantined it." He hesitated. "You know the rumors, right? There's something dangerous down there. A biological anomaly. Maybe worse." Nora glanced at the signal. It pulsed steadily, a quiet cry in the dark. She drummed her fingers on the armrest of her chair, considering her options. The Galactic Council wasn't known for being transparent about their quarantine zones. Often those labeled as threats were simply inconvenient. She hated the idea of leaving someone behind without at least investigating. It wasn't her style. "Let's get closer," she said, standing. "We'll take a look from orbit. No one's setting foot on the surface until we know what we're dealing with." Reyes sighed but gave the order. The Odyssey glided toward the planet, its sleek hull reflecting the distant glow of stars. The surface below came into view, jagged mountains, cracked terrain, and strange luminescent flora that pulsed faintly in the darkness. As they scanned the area, the distress signal's origin became clear. A small, crashed vessel nestled in the shadow of a cliff. "There," Reyes said, pointing at the display. "Single life form inside. No signs of hostiles nearby." Nora studied the readings. Whoever had sent the signal was alive but weak. It wasn't much of a lead, but it was enough. "Reyes, prep a landing team. I'll go down myself." "You sure that's wise?" Reyes asked. "The Council won't like it." Nora gave him a tight smile. "The Council doesn't have to like it. I'm not in the habit of ignoring distress signals." Minutes later, Nora stood in the airlock, suited up and ready to descend. Two other crew members joined her. Malik, the chief engineer, and Dr. Jenkins, their ship's medic. They entered the shuttle, descending toward the surface in silence. The atmosphere was thin but breathable, the landscape eerie in its stillness. When they reached the crash site, Nora led the way toward the damaged vessel. The hull was scorched, the interior ravaged by fire. Nora stepped cautiously inside, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, and then she saw her, a small figure huddled in the corner of the wreckage, barely moving. It was a girl, no older than 10 by human standards, with strange violet skin and large, luminescent eyes. Her silver hair was matted, and her thin arms were wrapped tightly around her knees. She looked up as Nora approached, her expression a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "Easy," Nora said softly, crouching to meet the girl's gaze. "We're not here to hurt you." The girl flinched as if expecting the worst. For a moment, Nora thought she wouldn't respond at all, but then the girl's lips parted, and a voice, small, trembling, escaped. "You shouldn't have come." Dr. Jenkins knelt beside Nora, scanning the girl with his medical device. "She's malnourished, dehydrated, probably in shock." "Let's get her back to the Odyssey," Nora said, her tone gentle but firm. "We can't leave her here." The girl's eyes widened. "You don't understand. I'm dangerous. We'll take our chances," Nora replied with a small smile, offering her hand. The girl hesitated for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took Nora's hand, her touch cold and fragile. Malik hoisted the girl onto his back with surprising ease, and they made their way back to the shuttle, the eerie landscape watching them in silence. Back on the Odyssey, the girl was settled into the med bay. Dr. Jenkins tended to her injuries while Nora stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the girl carefully. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this child than met the eye, and it seemed she was right. As soon as the girl began to recover, strange things started happening. Objects in the room trembled without warning, tools floating in midair, chairs sliding across the floor. At first, the crew thought it was some kind of mechanical failure, but then they realized it was the girl. Her fear and anxiety manifested as uncontrollable bursts of telekinesis. Reyes was the first to express his concern. "This isn't good, Captain. She could tear the ship apart if she loses control." Nora nodded slowly, her mind racing. "We'll help her. She doesn't need more people treating her like a monster." Reyes frowned. "The Council won't see it that way." "The Council isn't here," Nora replied. We are. That night, while the girl slept fitfully in the medbay, a message arrived from the Galactic Council. The official tone was cold, precise. They had detected the Odyssey in a restricted zone and demanded an immediate explanation. When Nora replied, informing them of the rescue, the Council's response was swift and harsh. The girl was to be surrendered at once. No discussion, no appeals. Nora stared at the transmission, jaw clenched. The Council saw the girl as a threat, something dangerous that needed to be contained or destroyed. But Nora saw something else. She saw a child, scared, alone, and desperately in need of kindness. She turned to Reyes, who was watching her with a knowing expression. We're not handing her over, Nora said quietly. Reyes exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I figured you'd say that. We'll keep her safe, Nora continued, no matter what. The crew rallied behind her decision without hesitation. They had seen the same thing Nora had. This wasn't a monster. This was a child in need, and humanity had never been known for abandoning those in need, no matter the consequences. Later that night, Nora visited the medbay again. The girl was awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at Nora with a mixture of confusion and hope. Why did you help me? The girl whispered. Because that's what we do, Nora said with a soft smile. We help. The girl's expression softened for the first time, a flicker of something unfamiliar crossing her face. Trust. As Nora turned to leave, the girl's voice stopped her. My name, it's Sierra. Nora smiled gently. Welcome aboard, Sierra. And with that, the Odyssey embarked on a journey that would change not just their lives, but the course of galactic history forever. The transition wasn't easy. Sierra's presence on the Odyssey created tension among the crew, especially as her powers manifested unpredictably. Objects would float, doors would slam shut without warning, and the lights flickered whenever she felt overwhelmed. But Captain Nora Winters refused to treat her like a threat. Instead, she treated her like any other scared child, patiently, with kindness, and, most importantly, with trust. At first, Sierra kept to herself. She sat quietly in the corner of the medbay, wary and confused by the human's kindness. Years of being told she was dangerous, treated like a problem to be locked away, had left her deeply suspicious. When Dr. Jenkins brought her food, she stared at it as if it might be poisoned. When Chief Engineer Malik tried to teach her a game, she shook her head silently. It wasn't that she didn't want to engage, she just didn't know how. But Nora and her crew were nothing if not persistent. You don't have to do anything, Sierra, Malik said one evening as he sat cross-legged on the floor of the medbay. He was tinkering with a small device, the parts spread out in front of him. But if you ever want to talk or play or whatever, we're here. Sierra said nothing, her glowing eyes fixed on the device in his hands. Malik noticed her interest and smiled. You like machines? Sierra gave a small, hesitant nod. Well, Malik continued, maybe I can show you some things later. I work down in engineering, lots of cool stuff there. The next day, Sierra wandered into engineering for the first time. Malik greeted her like an old friend, offering her a small tool and inviting her to help. At first, she only observed, her hands clasped tightly together. But slowly, as the days passed, she began to participate. Malik taught her how to fix simple components, and for the first time since her rescue, Sierra smiled, a fleeting expression but genuine. Her telekinesis, however, remained a problem. During moments of stress, her powers would flare uncontrollably, throwing tools across the room or causing heavy machinery to vibrate. The crew learned to adapt, treating the incidents with calm understanding instead of fear. Dr. Jenkins worked closely with her, guiding her through breathing exercises to help control her emotions. It's not about suppressing your powers, Jenkins explained one evening, sitting beside Sierra on the medbay bed. It's about learning to work with them, like riding a wave instead of fighting it. Sierra listened intently, her violet skin glowing faintly under the soft lights. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't asking her to get rid of her abilities. They were asking her to understand them. Captain Nora made a habit of checking in on Sierra regularly. She'd sit beside her, sometimes in comfortable silence, other times sharing stories about her own childhood on Earth. Sierra listened with quiet fascination, intrigued by the strange, messy world the humans described. A world where mistakes were allowed and second chances were given freely. One evening, as they sat in the mess hall eating dinner together, Sierra finally asked, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Nora smiled warmly. "Because I've seen a lot of dangerous things in my life, and you're not one of them," Sierra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, though she quickly wiped them away. It was the first time anyone had told her she wasn't dangerous. It was a moment that stayed with her, a small but powerful step toward trust. But not everyone on the ship was as comfortable with Sierra's presence. During an emergency drill, Sierra's fear caused her powers to spiral out of control. Heavy crates were thrown across the cargo bay, narrowly missing crew members. The lights flickered violently, and several systems crashed. Some of the crew began to murmur their doubts. Was keeping her on the ship really the right decision? Captain Nora gathered the crew in the mess hall later that night. "I know today was rough," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Sierra's powers are unpredictable, I get that, but she's learning, and she's not alone in this. We're in it together." The crew exchanged glances, some hesitant, others thoughtful. Malik leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "Look, I know today was a mess, but the kid's trying. We've all made mistakes, right? Hell, I nearly blew up the engine room my first week on board." Laughter rippled through the group, easing the tension. Nora smiled. "Exactly, we all make mistakes, and we all get better. That's what being part of a crew means." Sierra stood just outside the mess hall, listening to the conversation. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She had expected to be thrown out after the incident. Instead, the humans had stood by her, just as they promised. Later that night, Malik found her sitting alone in engineering. Without a word, he handed her a small bracelet, a simple band made from spare parts, each piece polished and fitted together with care. "This is for you," he said, fastening it around her wrist. "A little reminder that you're part of the crew now, and we've got your back." Sierra stared at the bracelet, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite name. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," and for the first time, felt a flicker of hope. But not all hope was free of danger. The Galactic Council had not forgotten about Sierra, nor were they pleased with the Odyssey's defiance. A stern transmission arrived the next morning, delivered with cold precision. The humans had one final chance to surrender Sierra, or they would face exile from all galactic trade routes. Nora read the message aloud in the command center, her expression unreadable. Reyes sighed, rubbing his temples. "They're not messing around. If we don't hand her over, we lose everything. Supplies, alliances, our reputation." The crew stood in tense silence, weighing their options, but Captain Nora didn't hesitate. "We knew this was coming. We're not handing her over." Reyes gave a weary smile. "Guess we're outlaws now, huh?" Malik grinned. "Outlaws with the coolest kid in the galaxy." Sierra stood at the back of the room, listening quietly. She knew what their decision meant. They were risking everything. Careers, safety, even their futures for her, and in that moment something shifted inside her. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a burden or a monster. She felt like she belonged. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but steady. Nora turned to her, a warm smile spreading across her face. "We've got you, Sierra, no matter what." And with those words, the crew of the Odyssey sealed their fate. They had chosen compassion over fear, defying the galaxy to protect the one person everyone else had abandoned. It was a choice that would change everything, because in saving Sierra, they were about to show the universe what humanity was truly capable of. The Odyssey drifted near the edge of a dense nebula, engines running quiet as the crew prepared for what they knew was coming. The Galactic Council's task force was on their trail, closing in fast. They had defied the Council, and now the consequences were barreling toward them through the void of space. Captain Nora Winters stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the swirling clouds of gas outside, her thoughts heavy. She could feel the weight of the decision they had made pressing down on her, but it was a decision she'd make again in a heartbeat. Lieutenant Reyes leaned over the command console, scanning for any sign of incoming ships. His expression was grim. "They'll be on us soon, Captain. 3 heavy cruisers, maybe more. There's no way we can outrun them." Nora nodded slowly. She had known the risks the moment she decided to protect Sierra, but hearing the cold reality didn't make it any easier. "We're not going to fight," she said. "We don't stand a chance in a firefight. We need a different way out." Sierra sat quietly on a bench at the back of the bridge, her small hands clutched tightly together. Her glowing violet eyes flicked between the crew members as they discussed options. Despite their calm demeanor, she could feel the tension rising, fear, uncertainty, and the quiet acceptance of danger. She knew they were risking everything for her, and guilt gnawed at her insides. Malik, the chief engineer, tapped a few keys on his tablet, displaying a schematic of the nebula on the main screen. "We could hide in there," he suggested, pointing at a dense pocket of swirling gas. "It'll mess with their sensors and give us some cover." Reyes shook his head. "It's a temporary solution. They'll send in drones to flush us out. We need something bigger, something they won't expect." Nora turned to Sierra, her gaze steady and kind. "Sierra," she said gently, "I know this is a lot to ask, but we need your help." Sierra's heart raced. "What? What can I do?" "We need you to use your powers," Nora explained. "You've already shown us what you can do when you're scared. But if you can control it, if you can bend gravity like before, we might be able to create a rift through the nebula. It's risky, but it's our best shot." Sierra's eyes widened in fear. She could still remember the chaos her powers had caused on the ship during the emergency drill. Equipment smashed, systems disabled, the angry looks from some of the crew. "What if I hurt someone? What if I mess up?" "You won't," Malik said, crouching beside her. He offered a reassuring smile. "You've been practicing, remember? You've got this, and we'll be right here with you." Sierra looked at Nora, then at the rest of the crew. They didn't just need her. They believed in her. They trusted her. It was something she had never experienced before, and it made her heart ache with both fear and hope. Nora knelt in front of her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know it's scary," she said softly, "but I also know you can do this. You're not alone." Sierra took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try." The crew sprang into action, preparing the ship for the maneuver. Malik routed power to the engines, Reyes monitored the Council fleet's approach, and Nora stayed by Sierra's side, offering quiet words of encouragement. The plan was simple in theory, but dangerously complex in execution. Sierra would use her telekinetic abilities to manipulate the gravitational forces around the ship, creating a temporary rift in the nebula. If successful, the rift would allow the Odyssey to slip through undetected, escaping the Council's warships. But it required precision, too much force, and the ship could be torn apart. Sierra stood in the center of the bridge, her small frame trembling with effort. She closed her eyes, focusing on the swirling energy within her. The hum of the ship faded into the background as she reached deep inside herself, drawing out the power she had kept locked away for so long. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the air around her began to shift. Tools and small objects on the bridge floated gently into the air, as if gravity had become a suggestion rather than a rule. The lights dimmed, flickering as the gravitational field around the ship warped and twisted. "You're doing great, Sierra," Nora whispered. "Just a little more." Sierra gritted her teeth, beads of sweat forming on her brow. Her hands trembled as she reached out mentally, wrapping invisible threads of energy around the ship. The nebula outside swirled faster, drawn toward the center of the rift she was creating. And then it happened. A sudden, brilliant flash of light as the rift opened, a shimmering tear in the fabric of space. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring, but the Odyssey held together. "Now!" Nora shouted. "Punch the engines, Malik." Malik grinned as he slammed his hand down on the throttle. The engines roared to life, and the Odyssey shot forward, slipping through the rift just as the Council's warships came into range. The rift collapsed behind them with a thunderous crack, leaving the Council fleet lost in the swirling chaos of the nebula. The crew erupted in cheers as the ship stabilized, leaving the danger behind. Nora leaned against the command console, her heart pounding in her chest. They had done it. They had escaped. Sierra collapsed to her knees, exhausted but smiling. I did it," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Nora knelt beside her, pulling her into a warm embrace. "You did more than that, kid," she said softly. "You saved all of us." Malik grinned from the engineering console. "And I gotta say, that was the coolest escape I've ever seen." Sierra laughed, a real joyous sound that filled the bridge. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't a burden or a threat. She was part of the crew. But their celebration was short-lived. Reyes pointed at the scanner, his expression grim once more. "The Council won't give up that easily," he said. "We're safe for now, but they'll keep hunting us." Nora nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Let them come," she said quietly. "We've got each other, and that's more than enough." Sierra looked around the bridge, her heart swelling with gratitude. These humans, they had risked everything for her, defied the entire galaxy just to give her a chance, and in doing so, they had shown her something she had never known: love. It was a dangerous thing, Sierra realized. Not her powers, not her potential for destruction, but love, humanity's ability to care, to protect, to see beyond fear and prejudice. That was the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. The Odyssey drifted through the far reaches of uncharted space, hidden from the Galactic Council's sensors. Days had passed since their daring escape through the nebula, and the crew now settled into a strange new rhythm. They were outlaws, cut off from the rest of civilization, but instead of despair, A sense of unity grew stronger among them. Sierra was at the heart of that change. Captain Nora Winters leaned back in her chair, watching as Sierra and Malik sat cross-legged on the engineering floor, piecing together a small drone from scavenged parts. The sight was surreal. What had once been a frightened alien child was now laughing softly, her glowing violet eyes alive with curiosity. Malik was patient, explaining each component as they worked, his easygoing manner a perfect match for Sierra's growing confidence. "You almost got it, kid," Malik said, handing her a tiny screwdriver. "Just tighten that, and we're good to go." Sierra beamed, carefully turning the last screw. The drone buzzed to life, hovering unsteadily in the air before zipping in circles around them. Malik gave a triumphant whoop, and Sierra's laughter echoed through the room. Nora couldn't help but smile. Sierra had become part of the crew, more than just a passenger or a mission. She was family now, and everyone on board knew it. Even Reyes, who had been the most cautious about keeping Sierra, had softened toward her over time. In the mess hall later that evening, the crew gathered for dinner. Sierra sat between Nora and Malik, eagerly eating the strange human food she'd grown to love. Dr. Jenkins raised his cup in a toast, grinning as the crew followed suit. "To the kid who keeps us on our toes," Jenkins said, raising his cup toward Sierra, "and to the captain who's too stubborn to know when to quit." The crew laughed, and Nora gave a playful roll of her eyes. "I'll take that as a compliment, Doc." Sierra looked around the table, her heart full. These humans had risked everything for her, and in doing so, they had become her family. It was a concept she had never truly understood before now, what it meant to be cared for, to belong somewhere. Later that night, as the ship hummed quietly through the void, Nora found Sierra sitting in one of the observation bays, staring out at the stars. She approached quietly, sitting beside her without saying a word. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the vastness of space stretching out before them. "Do you miss your home?" Nora asked gently. Sierra shook her head slowly. "I never really had a home," she whispered. "Not until now." Nora felt a warmth spread through her chest. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pendant, a simple metal disc engraved with the symbol of the Odyssey. She placed it in Sierra's hand, closing her fingers around it. "This is yours," Nora said softly. "It's a reminder that no matter where we go, you'll always be part of this crew. Always." Sierra stared at the pendant for a long moment, her glowing eyes shimmering with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the pendant tightly. As the days turned into weeks, Sierra's control over her abilities improved. With Jenkins and Malik's help, she learned to channel her telekinesis more precisely, focusing on small, delicate tasks. She could move objects without shattering them, and she no longer feared losing control during moments of stress. But life on the run wasn't easy. The Galactic Council continued to hunt them, broadcasting warnings to every corner of the galaxy. The Odyssey and its crew were branded as criminals, and any ship found aiding them would face severe consequences. Despite the isolation, the crew found unlikely allies among other outcasts, ships that had been exiled from Council space for one reason or another. Some offered supplies, others shared information. Many were drawn by the humans' defiance, inspired by their decision to protect Sierra. "You know," Reyes said one day as they reviewed incoming messages, "we're starting to become a bit of a legend out here. The crew that stood up to the Council and lived to tell the tale." Nora chuckled. "Let's just hope we live long enough to keep telling it." But even as they found support among the fringes of space, the pressure from the Council grew. More warships were dispatched, and the net around the Odyssey tightened. The crew knew they couldn't keep running forever. One evening, Nora gathered the crew in the command center. Sierra sat quietly beside her, clutching the pendant around her neck. The mood in the room was serious. This wasn't just another strategy session, it was a moment of decision. "We can't keep running," Nora began, her voice steady. "Sooner or later they'll catch us, and I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in hiding for the rest of my life." Malik leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "What's the alternative? We take the fight to them?" "Not exactly," Nora replied. "We take a stand. We confront the Council not with weapons, but with the truth. We show them what they're so afraid of." "And what exactly are they afraid of?" Jenkins asked, raising an eyebrow. Nora glanced at Sierra, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "They're afraid of her, not because of her powers, but because of what she represents. She's proof that fear isn't the only way to deal with danger. Compassion works too. They just don't want to admit it." The crew exchanged glances, weighing the risks. It was a dangerous plan, maybe even a reckless one, but it was also the right thing to do. And every person in that room knew it. Reyes sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, I didn't sign up for this job to play it safe. I'm in, Malek grinned. You know I'm always up for making the council sweat. Jenkins raised his hands in mock surrender. Guess I'm in too. Somebody's got to keep you all in one piece. Sierra looked around the room, overwhelmed by the support surrounding her. She had spent so long being told she was dangerous, feared and rejected by her own people. But here, among these humans, she had found acceptance, something she had never thought possible. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. Nora placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression warm. We've got your back, Sierra, no matter what. With their decision made, the crew of the Odyssey prepared for the final chapter of their journey. They would return to known space, not to surrender, but to prove that compassion was stronger than fear, and no matter what happened, they would face it together, as a family. The Odyssey glided silently into Council space, its hull gleaming in the light of distant stars. Captain Nora Winters stood at the helm, her gaze steady as the ship approached the heart of the Galactic Council's territory. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing full well that there was no going back. The crew had made their choice to take a stand, not with weapons, but with truth. Reyes scanned the incoming transmissions, his jaw tightening. They know we're here, Captain. Multiple warships inbound. They'll intercept us within minutes. Nora nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. Broadcast the message. Let them know we're not here to fight. Reyes tapped a few buttons on the console, sending the transmission on every channel. Nora's voice echoed through the stars, carried across frequencies monitored by every council vessel in the sector. This is Captain Nora Winters of the Odyssey. We are not here to engage in conflict. We come in peace, seeking dialogue. We ask only that you listen. The message was met with silence at first, but then, one by one, the signals of the council's warships began to respond. Warnings, demands for surrender, threats. Nora stood firm, her hands clasped behind her back. They're not interested in talking, Reyes muttered. They will be, Nora replied calmly. They just don't know it yet. Sierra stood at the edge of the bridge, clutching the pendant around her neck. Her glowing violet eyes were wide with fear, but there was also a flicker of something else, determination. This was her fight too, and she wasn't about to back down. The council fleet surrounded the Odyssey, dozens of massive vessels bristling with weaponry. A cold, commanding voice crackled over the comms, cutting through the tension like a knife. Captain Winters, you are ordered to surrender the entity known as Sierra immediately. Non-compliance will result in the destruction of your vessel. Nora's gaze didn't waver. We're not surrendering her, she said evenly. And if you think we came all this way just to be threatened, you don't understand us at all. There was a long, tense silence. The warships loomed closer, their weapons locked on target. But Nora stood her ground, her crew beside her, their resolve unshaken. Sierra stepped forward, her small frame trembling, but her voice steady. I know you're afraid of me, she said softly, her words carried across the open channel. But I'm not the monster you think I am. The council's response was swift and cold. You are a threat to the stability of the galaxy. We cannot allow you to remain free. You're wrong, Nora interjected, her voice cutting through the comms. The only threat here is your fear. Fear of what you don't understand. Sierra isn't a danger. She's a child, and she deserves a chance. The tension on the bridge was palpable, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. The council ships inched closer, their weapons primed. Nora knew they were running out of time, but she also knew that they weren't alone. One by one, smaller ships began to appear on the fringes of the battlefield. Outcasts, exiles, and independent vessels drawn to the Odyssey's cause. They had heard the humans' message, and they had come to stand with them. Reyes's eyes widened as more ships arrived, each broadcasting their support. Captain, we've got company. Nora smiled, relief washing over her. I knew they'd show up. The council fleet hesitated, caught off guard by the growing number of vessels rallying to the Odyssey's side. What had started as a mission to capture a single alien girl was rapidly spiraling out of their control. This is bigger than just Sierra, Nora said, addressing the council once more. This is about fear versus hope. You've spent so long trying to control everything you fear that you've forgotten what it means to trust. For a moment, there was only silence, and then, to everyone's surprise, several council warships powered down their weapons, breaking formation. It was a small but significant gesture, a crack in the armor of fear that had held the galaxy in its grip for so long. Sierra stepped closer to the console, her heart pounding. I'm not here to destroy anything, she said softly. I just want to live, to be part of something, like they are. The council's remaining warships wavered, their commanders uncertain. The tide was turning and they knew it. They had seen what the humans were capable of. Not destruction or domination, but something far more dangerous. Compassion. The council fleet began to retreat, one ship after another falling back into the shadows of space. Nora watched them go, her heart swelling with pride. They had done it, not with violence but with truth. The bridge of the Odyssey erupted in cheers, the crew celebrating their hard-won victory. Malik clapped Reyes on the back, grinning from ear to ear. Jenkins raised his cup in a toast, his smile wide and unguarded. "We did it," Sierra whispered, her voice filled with awe. Nora knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Sierra. You proved them wrong." Sierra smiled, tears shimmering in her glowing eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt free, not just from fear, but from the weight of being seen as a threat. She was more than her powers. She was part of something bigger, a family, a future. As the ships around them scattered into the stars, the Odyssey set a new course, heading into the unknown. There were still challenges ahead, battles to fight, and lessons to learn. But for the first time in a long time, they faced the future with hope. Nora stood at the helm, her crew around her, the stars stretching out before them. They had defied the galaxy and won, not with weapons, but with love. And in doing so, they had shown the universe the true power of humanity. Because the scariest thing about humans wasn't their strength or their technology. It was their ability to love fiercely, to see the good in others even when no one else could. It was their willingness to befriend monsters and to turn them into family. And sometimes the monsters loved them back.